On the 4th of May, 1949, the greatest football team the world had ever seen boarded a plane in Lisbon. 90 minutes later, none of them were alive. This wasn't a team that was good. This was a team that was rewriting what a football club could be. 5 straight league titles, 10 players from a starting 11 who were the national team. And in one afternoon, all of it, the trophies, the dynasty, an entire generation of Italian football, was gone. Stick around, because the story of how they died is haunting enough on its own. But the story of what happened after, how one grieving city fielded a team of teenagers just to finish the season, and how Italy is still arguing about who's really to blame. That's the part nobody tells you. Rewind 6 years. Turin, Italy, a city rebuilding itself after the war, and one football club, Torino FC, about to become something the country had never seen. Between 1943 and 1949, Torino won 5 consecutive Serie A titles. To put that in perspective, no Italian club has ever matched that streak, before or since. But the number that really tells the story is this one. On the 11th of May, 1947, Italy played a friendly against Hungary. 10 of the 11 starters were Torino players. 10 out of 11 on the national team. Their captain was Valentino Mazzola, and if you know one name from this story, it should be his. Mazzola wasn't just the best player on the best team in Italy. Teammates said he had a habit before every match. He'd roll his sleeves down slowly, deliberately, like he was giving the opposition one last chance to change their minds. Opposing fans didn't boo him. They stood up and applauded him. That's how good this team was. By 1949, Il Grande Torino wasn't just winning. They were doing it with style that made grown men weep in the stands. Some historians still call it the single greatest club side Europe had produced up to that point. Now, quick question before we go further. If you had to guess how a team this dominant finally loses its grip on history, what would you assume? An injury crisis? A financial collapse? A rival club poaching their stars? None of that. It was fog. In early May 1949, Torino traveled to Lisbon, Portugal, for a farewell testimonial match honoring Francisco Ferreira, the captain of Benfica. Here's the detail almost nobody mentions. Several key players almost didn't go. Torino were in the final stretch of a title race they'd already all but sealed, and some club officials debated resting their stars for the run-in. The club decided to send the squad anyway, as a gesture of respect to Benfica. On the 3rd of May, Torino beat Benfica 4-3 in Lisbon. It was a good game. Nobody in that stadium had any idea they were watching most of these players for the last time. The next day, the team's charter plane, a Fiat G.212, operated by Aviolini Italiane, took off from Lisbon, made a refueling stop in Barcelona, and headed home to Turin. But Turin, on the afternoon of May 4th, was buried under one of the thickest fogs anyone could remember. And this is where you need to understand the geography, because it's the whole tragedy in one detail. On a hill overlooking Turin sits the Basilica di Superga, an 18th-century church, sitting at over 600 meters, on a ridge that basically guards the eastern edge of the city. In clear weather, pilots flying into Turin's airport could see it easily and route around it. In fog this thick, the hill disappears completely. It becomes invisible high ground in the middle of a routine approach path. At 5:03 in the afternoon, the pilot radioed the tower, requesting altitude and confirming his position. The tower gave him the readings. He believed he'd already cleared the hill. He hadn't. At 5:03 p.m. on the 4th of May, 1949, the plane carrying Il Grande Torino struck the retaining wall behind the Basilica di Superga at full cruising speed. All 31 people on board were killed instantly. 18 players, club staff, journalists who had traveled with the team, the flight crew. Among them, Valentino Mazzola, the captain who made rival fans stand and applaud. Within the hour, word reached the city. And what happened next in Turin is something you genuinely don't see anywhere else in football history. An estimated 500,000 people, in a city of roughly 700,000, lined the streets of Turin for the funeral procession. That's not a typo. Roughly 7 out of every 10 people in the city came out to grieve a football team. But here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. The season wasn't over. Torino still had 4 league matches left to play, and under the rules at the time, the club had to field a team or forfeit. So think about that for a second. You've just lost your entire first team, literally every regular starter, in a single afternoon. What do? Torino fielded their youth squad. Teenagers, some barely out of school, wearing the same maroon shirts the greatest team in Europe had worn a week earlier. And in a gesture that's almost unheard of in professional sport, every single one of Torino's remaining opponents that season did the same thing. They fielded their own youth teams too, out of respect, so the results wouldn't feel like a mockery of what had been lost. Torino won every one of those final matches. They were already champions before the crash. The title was theirs regardless. But the football world made sure nobody could ever say Torino's fifth Scudetto was anything but earned. Here's the part of this story that reaches far beyond one football club. Remember that stat from earlier? 10 of Italy's national team starters were Torino players? A year after the crash, Italy traveled to the 1950 World Cup in Brazil as reigning champions, defending the title they'd won in 1938. They were knocked out in the first round. Historians still argue about exactly how much of that collapse traces back to Superga, but the timing is impossible to ignore. Italy didn't just lose a football club that day. They lost the spine of their national team, all at once, with no time to rebuild. And this is where the actual controversy of this story lives. Not the crash itself, but the question that's followed it for over 70 years. Could it have been prevented? Some aviation historians point to the air traffic tower's altitude readings as flawed. Others argue the pilot, a war veteran with thousands of hours of experience, simply trusted instruments that were giving him bad information in zero visibility conditions. Official investigations at the time largely ruled it an accident caused by the fog and an altimeter misreading, but conspiracy-adjacent theories about sabotage have circulated in Italy for decades. Most historians dismiss them, but they've never fully gone away. What's not in dispute is this. It was the deadliest disaster in the history of Italian club football, and one of the deadliest in the sport worldwide. Today, if you climb the hill behind Turin, you'll find that wall still standing, with a plaque bearing 31 names. Torino fans still make the walk every May 4th, decades later. Torino did rebuild, eventually, but the club has never again come close to 5 straight titles. Some say the club, and the city, never fully got their identity back. Here's the question I want you to sit with. How differently do you think Italian football, maybe European football, looks today, if that plane lands safely? We'll genuinely never know. That's what makes this one of the most haunting what-ifs in sports history. Il Grande Torino never got to find out how great they could become. All we're left with is how great they already were. Rest in peace, Illinois Grande Torino, May 4th, 1949. If you want the next untold story, the one about a football match played between two armies in the middle of a war in no man's land, that one's coming soon. Subscribe so you don't miss it.